The dust was a perpetual shroud over the valley, fine and relentless, settling into the deep-etched lines of the land and coating everything with the same weary ochre. It clung to Alara's skin, a second hide beneath the tattered cotton of her dress, and tasted of grit on her tongue with every breath. The sun, a malevolent eye in a washed-out sky, beat down on the baked earth, leaching the last drops of moisture from the stubborn grass. It had been weeks since the last rain that truly mattered, months since her father was gone, leaving her with a handful of bony livestock, a shack that listed precariously against the wind, and the heavy weight of solitude. Fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach that tightened with the setting sun and loosened only slightly with the dubious comfort of dawn. It wasn't just the loneliness, though that was a vast, aching void. It was the creeping dread of failure, of the animals dying, of the well running dry, of the few neighbors who circled like buzzards, their eyes calculating the value of her meager holdings. The Carters, in particular, large men with small eyes and greedy hands, had made it clear they expected her to fold. A woman alone couldn't hold this land, they implied with their slow drawls and lingering stares. It was a matter of time. She knelt by the trough, pouring the precious, scooped water from the nearly empty cistern, watching the sheep crowd forward, their ribs stark beneath their wool. Each one felt like a personal responsibility, a living symbol of her struggle. Her fingers, chapped and calloused, trembled slightly. How much longer could she stretch this? How much longer until the well was truly dry, until the animals starved, until the Carters came not just to eye the property but to take it? It was mid-morning when the sound reached her, the rhythmic thud of a horse's hooves on the hard ground. Her head snapped up, heart lurching. Visitors were rare, especially ones that rode with purpose. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her hands on her skirt, her gaze fixed on the dust cloud rising in the distance. As the rider drew closer, she saw he was a stranger, not one of the locals. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He rode with an easy competence that spoke of long miles and self-reliance. He stopped by the fence, his horse blowing softly. He didn't dismount immediately, just surveyed the yard, the shack, the small, struggling flock, and finally, her. His gaze was steady, appraising, but held none of the familiar local contempt or pity. It was neutral, professional. This was Silas. She'd heard a rumor, a whisper carried on the wind from town, of a man who traveled through, buying hardy stock for distant ranches. A buyer. Her father had sometimes spoken of selling a few lambs if times got desperate, but the Carters had always dissuaded any potential buyers from approaching her father's place. Now one had come unbidden, unexpected. Her voice, when she finally found it, was raspy from dust and disuse. "You lost?" she asked, the words sounding brittle in the vast silence. He shook his head slowly, his eyes, shadowed under the brim, still on her. "Heard this place might have some tough sheep," he said, his voice deep and quiet, like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed. "Came to see them." He swung down from his horse, the movement fluid and efficient. He was taller than he'd seemed in the saddle. His face was weathered, lined, with a jaw set with quiet resolve. There was a scar near his left eye, faint but visible. He looked like a man who understood hardship, not one who inflicted it. Yet, her fear remained, a stubborn coil. She was alone, vulnerable, and he was a stranger. Every instinct screamed caution. But the sight of him, competent and calm amidst her chaos, also stirred something else, a flicker of fragile hope. Could he offer a way out, even just a temporary reprieve? Or was he just another threat in a different guise? The dust swirled around his boots as he took a step towards the fence, and she braced herself, the worn fabric of her skirt clutched tight in her hand. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and the vast, desolate emptiness of the land. He didn't press, didn't try to make conversation. He simply leaned against the fence, his hat pushed back slightly now, revealing a sun-browned forehead and observant eyes the color of creek stone. He watched the sheep, noting their condition, their number. Then his gaze shifted to the land itself, the struggling grass, the distant, empty horizon. He didn't speak, but his silence was not dismissive. It was considering. Alara watched him, a tight knot in her chest easing marginally. He wasn't like the Carters, who looked only with avarice. He seemed to see the reality of the place, the stark, unvarnished truth of it. After a long moment, he straightened, pushing off the fence. "Mind if I take a closer look?" he asked, his voice still quiet. It wasn't a demand, merely a request. She hesitated for only a second. What choice did she have? Refusal meant letting the opportunity slip, potentially condemning her flock to starvation. Allowing him meant a stranger walking onto her vulnerable property. But his presence, strong and calm, felt less threatening than the constant, gnawing fear that usually gripped her. "Go on," she managed, her voice still thin. "They're tough, used to hard times." He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He walked among the sheep, moving slowly, letting them get used to him. He knelt beside a ewe, examining her fleece, her legs. He didn't speak to her, didn't try to charm or cajole. He simply observed, his movements deliberate and respectful of the animals. Alara followed at a distance, her eyes scanning the horizon nervously. The Carters sometimes rode out this way, just to make their presence known, to remind her she was alone. While Silas was with the sheep, a sound made her jump. A frantic bleating from the small shed where she kept the few sickly lambs. One had been weak since birth. She ran towards the shed, Silas following, his stride long and quiet. Inside, the lamb was struggling, its breathing shallow and ragged. It had tangled itself in some old twine. Her heart sank. She knelt beside it, her hands hovering uncertainly. She knew what this usually meant. Another loss. Another chip away at her dwindling resources, her dwindling hope. Silas knelt beside her, his proximity a sudden, unexpected warmth. He didn't push her aside, but his large, capable hands gently untangled the twine. His fingers sure and quick. He assessed the lamb with a practiced eye. "Got a fever," he murmured. He looked at Alara. "Got any laudanum? Or just clean rags? Hot water?" She blinked, surprised by his immediate, practical response. "Laudanum, father had some," she stammered, getting up quickly. She found the small bottle in the house, along with a clean cloth and a pot to heat water. When she returned, Silas had already moved the lamb to a clean spot on the straw. He took the bottle, measured a small amount onto the cloth with surprising care, and gently dabbed it on the lamb's gums. He then showed Alara how to wrap the lamb to keep it warm, how to coax a few drops of water from a soaked rag into its mouth. He didn't take over entirely, but guided her, his presence a quiet support. Later, sitting outside the shed as the lamb rested fitfully, Silas finally spoke beyond the immediate task. "Hard country for young stock," he said, stating the obvious, but without judgment. "Hard country for anything trying to live," Alara replied, the weariness thick in her voice. He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "You're managing." It was such a simple statement, but it hit her with unexpected force. No one had acknowledged her struggle, her effort, her refusal to just give up. They had only seen her vulnerability. "Trying to," she whispered, suddenly feeling the weight of it all pressing down. She risked a question that had been forming. "You travel far?" "Most of the territories," he replied. "Seen a lot of land. Met a lot of people." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and she felt a faint blush rise to her cheeks, unbidden. It was the first time in months she hadn't felt entirely invisible. This quiet stranger, who had come for sheep, had seen her struggle, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a fragile connection across the vast distance of her solitude. As the day wore on, Silas continued to assess the flock, walking the small pasture, asking Alara simple, direct questions about their health, their age, their history. She answered readily, grateful for the practical conversation that distracted from her fear. He moved with an economy of motion, his presence steady and calm. He didn't comment on the state of the house, the bareness of the yard, or the obvious signs of hardship. He focused on the livestock, the potential transaction, and the sick lamb he had helped with, checking on it periodically. It was late afternoon when the dust cloud reappeared, larger this time and closer than before. Alara's blood ran cold. The Carters. They were riding with purpose, not just passing by. Her hand instinctively went to the axe leaning against the porch. Fear spiked, sharp and debilitating. Silas straightened from where he had been examining a ram. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. "Problem?" he asked, his voice losing its quiet softness, becoming edged with a different kind of hardness. "The Carters," she whispered, her voice trembling. They don't like me being here." He didn't ask for more details, didn't need to. The look on their faces as they rode up said everything. 3 of them, large and swaggering, pulling their horses to a halt just beyond the fence. Their eyes narrowed, taking in the scene, Silas, the stranger, standing near Alara. Surprise flickered across their faces, quickly replaced by annoyance and suspicion. "Well now, looky here." The largest one, Jeb Carter, sneered, his gaze sweeping over Silas. "Got company, have you, girl?" His eyes lingered on Alara with an unpleasant familiarity. "Didn't reckon you had friends." Silas stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Alara and the Carters. He didn't say anything, just stood there, a silent, imposing figure. "We heard you was looking to sell some sheep, mister," another Carter, younger but just as brutish, said, addressing Silas but keeping his eyes on Alara. "Figured we'd save you the trouble. We'll be talking, off her hands soon enough anyway." "Cheap." Silas's gaze remained steady on Jeb. "Came to buy," he said, his voice low and level, but carrying an undeniable weight. "From her." Jeb laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "From her? She ain't got nothing worth buyin'. Runnin' this place into the ground. Better off letting us take it over." "Save her the trouble," he dismounted, taking a step towards the fence, his hand resting on the butt of the pistol at his hip. The other 2 dismounted as well. This wasn't just intimidation today. Alara's breath hitched. This was it. The confrontation she had dreaded. She gripped the axe handle tighter, her knuckles white. Fear warred with a surge of defiant anger. They wouldn't just take it. Silas didn't move, but his body language shifted, becoming coiled and alert. "She seems to be managing just fine," he said. "Stock looks healthy enough. I'll pay a fair price." Jeb's face contorted. "You ain't from around here, are you, stranger?" His voice dropped, becoming menacing. "Some things ain't your business. This land, these sheep, they belong to us by rights. It's only a matter of time. Time runs out quick sometimes," Silas said, his voice still quiet, but with a steel edge that made the air crackle. "Especially for men who ride onto a woman's land making threats." Jeb froze, his hand tightening on his pistol. His 2 companions exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to Alara's fear, her isolation. They weren't used to this, a stranger, standing his ground, radiating quiet confidence. The tension was a palpable thing, stretching thin, ready to snap. Alara stood behind Silas, the axe heavy in her hands, her fear replaced by a fierce, protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. This land was hers. These sheep were hers. And this stranger, for whatever reason, was standing with her. Jeb hesitated for a long moment, his eyes trying to read Silas. He saw no fear there, only a formidable stillness. The sun glinted off Silas's eyes, giving them an unyielding look. Jeb wasn't a coward, but he wasn't reckless either. Taking on a capable stranger, potentially armed on unfamiliar ground, wasn't part of his plan. Not for just this. Not yet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jeb slowly removed his hand from his pistol. "This ain't over, girl," he snarled at Alara, his gaze full of thwarted rage. To Silas, he said, "You got lucky this time, stranger, but you won't be here forever." Silas didn't reply, didn't move, didn't show a flicker of relief or tension easing. He simply held their gaze, a silent, unmovable obstacle. The carters mounted their horses, muttering curses under their breath. They rode away the way they came, the dust cloud receding, taking their menace with them, for now. The silence they left behind was different from the usual quiet of the land. It was charged, vibrating with the adrenaline of the confrontation. Alara let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her grip on the axe loosened, her hands shaking. She looked at Silas, her eyes wide. He turned then, his gaze soft in contrast to the hard line of his jaw. They left, she whispered, the reality sinking in. They had left. They hadn't pushed, hadn't fought. Silas had faced them down with nothing but his presence and a few quiet words. He nodded. For now, he looked at the axe in her hand, then back at her face, seeing not just the fear, but the determination etched there. You handled yourself. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was like rain on parched earth. He had seen her standing ready, willing to fight for what was hers, even against men much larger and stronger. She hadn't fled, hadn't crumpled. She had stood. Why? She asked, the single word holding a multitude of questions. Why had he stayed? Why had he faced them down? He had come for sheep, not to fight her battles. He was silent for a moment, looking out at the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a fleeting beauty in the harsh landscape. Don't like bullies, he said finally, his voice returning to its quiet timbre. He paused. And didn't like the idea of them taking what you've worked for. He turned back to her, his gaze steady. It takes grit to stay here, to keep going. Takes courage. He wasn't just talking about the land or the sheep. He was talking about her, about the quiet strength she had shown him, not just in the face of the carters, but in every aspect of her solitary life. He had come to buy livestock, a simple transaction, but he had encountered something far more valuable, a story of quiet courage unfolding in the desolate plains. He stayed the night, sleeping rolled in his bedroll near the house, a silent guardian. The next morning, he didn't just buy a few sheep. He bought a significant portion of her flock, enough to give her a cushion, enough to fix the fence properly, enough to buy feed for the remaining animals and perhaps even dig the well deeper. He paid her a fair price, more than the carters would ever have offered. As he counted out the money, his calloused fingers precise, he looked at her again. That lamb, he said. Keep up with the care. Might just make it. It was a small thing, but it felt like a promise. He loaded the sheep onto his small transport trailer, working efficiently. Alara watched him. A sense of gratitude so profound it was almost painful swelling in her chest. He was leaving, returning to his travels, but he was leaving her stronger, safer than he had found her. He had given her not just money, but something less tangible yet more valuable. The confirmation of her own strength, the knowledge that she could stand, and that sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. When he was ready to ride out, he stopped near her. You stay safe, Alara, he said, using her name, the sound unfamiliar and warm on his tongue. She met his gaze, the fear still present, but now layered with resilience. I will, she promised, her voice stronger than it had been yesterday. Thank you, Silas. The simple words felt inadequate for the debt she owed, not just for his intervention, but for seeing her, for acknowledging her struggle and her strength. He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He mounted his horse, the movement as easy as ever. As he rode away, disappearing back into the shroud of dust, Alara stood watching, the sun on her face. The land was still harsh, the challenges immense, but the crushing weight of despair had lifted, replaced by a quiet determination. She had faced down her demons, both internal and external, and she had not broken. Silas had come seeking livestock, but he had witnessed courage, quiet and fierce, blooming stubbornly in the heart of the wasteland. And he would carry that story with him, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, found in the most unlikely of places. She was Alara, alone on the plains, but no longer simply vulnerable. She was a survivor. She was strong. and she would endure.